And Kelly, you can take it away.
So our presentation by Kelly Francis from the User Documentation Subteam is about managing the manual, an overview of the User Documentation Group. Kelly Francis is a senior archivist and has been at her institution since 2017. She has been a member of the User Documentation Subteam since 2024 and is the current lead. It is a safe assumption that anyone using ArchivesSpace starts off by referring to the user manual. Consequently, it is essential the user manual remains up to date and reflects any changes in recent releases. But who works to manage any changes and how are those changes done? This session will give an overview of the user documentation subteam, including their workflow, recent projects, and current projects.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. So, can you see my slides?
Yep, we can see your slides.
Oh, I need to hide everybody's picture on the side. Okay. So today I'm going to give an overview of the user documentation subteam and some of our recent activities. So it might not be immediately apparent how this fits in with the theme of the forum, which is maximizing access. But before you can maximize access to fit the needs of your institution, you first need to understand how to use ArchivesSpace. And most people turn to the user manual for instruction and guidance. And that is where the user documentation subteam comes in. So a little background, ArchivesSpace is supported by the community it serves, meaning that individuals from member institutions serve on the governance board and the advisory councils. There are two advisory councils, the User Advisory Council and the Technical Advisory Council, each of which have subteams. User documentation, or as we tend to refer to ourselves, user docs, is a subteam of the User Advisory Council. There are also cross-council subteams that report to both the User Advisory and the Technical Advisory Councils. Members on the councils are appointed by the Governance Board from nominations, and they serve a 3-year term. So the User Docs team consists of 5 active members plus Jessica, who guides us and keeps us informed of upcoming releases or other activities that we should be aware of. We're a small team, but we're pretty mighty, and we do a lot of behind-the-scenes work. So User Docs is responsible for the ArchivesSpace user manual and has 3 primary purposes. The first is to create documentation for the user manual, either for new releases or in response to user needs. User Docs is also responsible for updating and maintaining the user manual. Updates are made in response to new releases, comments on pages in the manual, from JIRA tickets, or from direct feedback. And when not creating or revising documentation, User Docs conducts a systematic review of sections within the manual. And finally, communication with other User Advisory Council and Technical Advisory Council subteams is important, especially those whose work intersects with ours, like development prioritization, testing, and technical documentation. So a little bit about the team's workflow and processes. At the start of every term, team members sign up to be primary and secondary watchers of a section in the manual. If there's a comment on a page in that section or changes are required in response to a JIRA ticket, the primary watcher is responsible for making those changes. This is more of a passive responsibility, as no action is necessary unless someone actually comments or changes are needed as a result of a ticket. Also, at the beginning of a term, the team agrees on a section of the manual to review. A section is selected based on the date of the section's last review and/or any enhancements or changes in an upcoming release. At the start of this term, we focused on reviewing the importing and exporting data section, knowing that the upcoming version 4 release would include the new bulk update of archival objects functionality, and documentation for that would be housed within the importing and exporting data section. When reviewing a page, we make sure that the content is still accurate and reflects the most current version of ArchivesSpace. This includes all screenshots. We also update the pages to reflect the current style guide. And recent updates to the style guide include recommendations for borders and shading around the screenshot, the use of info panels, and whether to use a list or a table for subrecord fields. The style guide helps the user docs team maintain consistency across the manual, which is especially helpful with team members rotating on and off annually. So once all changes are made, the secondary watcher is notified so they can do an additional review and provide any feedback before the page is finally published. So as I mentioned, user docs consists of 5 team members, which can feel rather small at times depending on the workload. Since a lot of the work that we do is tied to upcoming releases, which can be challenging since it's time sensitive and the amount or complexity of new documentation can vary. ArchivesSpace has been around since 2013 and a lot has changed in that time. Enhanced functionality leads to a better user experience, but it can also lead to more complicated documentation. For example, when we were updating the importing and exporting data section, what seemed to be a relatively straightforward review led to some unexpected legacy issues, particularly around subrecord pages, which I'll touch on later. And despite having a style guide and other guidelines for the review process, there are bound to be inconsistencies with so many people editing the manual over the years. Formatting preferences and style guides evolve along with changing functionalities in Confluent. So to give you an idea of what UserDocs worked on for the version 4 release, some of the new documentation we created are the bulk update of archival objects and importing digital objects within a resource record. Also, during our review of the importing and exporting data section, it was discovered that there was no documentation for importing location records or importing subject records, and no documentation under the importing and exporting data section for importing assessment records. So those were also created. Some of the revised documentation completed this term includes the public user interface page to reflect the navigation tree being moved from the right side of the page to the left, and a new feature that allows for a collection with 40 or more archival records to load all at once. Also, the importing records overview page was updated, and the importing accession data or digital object data page was split into 2 separate pages. So in addition to creating documentation and the systematic review of the manual, UserDocs also typically has at least one major project that they work on each term as time allows. And sometimes these projects can span multiple terms. So when we started looking at the documentation needed for the version 4 release, it initially seemed rather straightforward. We would need to create a new page for the bulk update of archival objects, revise the POI page, and a few other smaller changes. But as we started to review the importing and exporting data section, speed bumps kept popping up, the biggest of which is having the same or similar documentation in multiple locations. This can make it difficult to keep documentation updated and standardized when it's in more than one place. So with the release of version 4 behind us and sometime before our next release, the project for this term is the consolidation of duplicate pages into a single higher level page. The subrecords listed on the slide are some of the ones that we've identified as having pages in multiple locations. And we are currently in the process of consolidating these pages, updating them to reflect the style guide, and taking new screenshots when necessary. We hope to wrap this project up by the end of the term, which is in June. So the user manual is an essential guide for new and experienced users of ArchivesSpace. It exists to serve the community, which means all of you. So if you see something that's outdated or needs further clarification, please let us know. And the best way to do so is to comment directly on the page. And consider joining UserDocs. It's a great way to become more knowledgeable about how ArchivesSpace works. You will become intimately familiar with the user manual, and you'll make some great connections in the process. So look for more information coming soon about the User Advisory Council nomination process if you're interested in getting involved or creating some documentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. That was a great overview of what this team does and also what this team has done this year. This is really important sub-team of the User Advisory Council, as you can tell, and that's a resource that members rely on very heavily. Jamie did drop a link into the chat earlier that allows you to direct access to the user manual. If you have not signed up for a Help Center account, you will need to do that before you can access the user manual, but we do have instructions on our wiki for how to do that. If you have any questions for Kelly, please feel free to drop those into the chat. But as she said, nominations or a call for nominations will be going out soon for the User Advisory Council, and the User Doc subteam is a part of the User Advisory Council. So if you're interested in that work, oh yeah, so she says, how do you join User Docs? Whenever the call for nominations goes out for the User Advisory Council, self-nominations are welcome. So please feel free to go ahead and nominate yourself, all members. So everyone in this forum are eligible to serve on a council. And we'll be hearing in our session later today from both the metadata standards subteam and the user document, or nope, we already just heard, and the development prioritization subteam. Those are two more subteams that do important work for ArchivesSpace. So as you're learning about this, if these are groups that you're interested in participating in, please do nominate yourself. Like I said, the work they do is really important, and it's the work that we all do as a community. But yeah, if there's any other questions, please do drop those into the chat. Elizabeth says, great job, Kelly. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. If we don't have any questions, and I'll speak very slowly in case one pops up, we will go ahead and wrap up this first session of the virtual member forum for 2025. It perfectly on time. It's amazing how these things happen. That's great. We will come back together in 2 hours for session B. So if you have not yet registered for that session, please do so now so that you can join us again when we come back together today or tomorrow for our final session of the virtual member forum. And Jamie did just drop into the chat. We do have a survey available. So if this is the only session you're able to join us for, that we hate to hear it, but please do fill out the survey to let us know how the session went. And we will be doing a drawing, and one lucky winner who completes the survey will be winning an ArchivesSpace swag bag. So you definitely want to get in on that. But yeah, thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to Katerina for doing introductions. That was really helpful. Thank you to Jamie for moderating the chat. And thank you to all of you for sticking with us for the past 2 hours. And I look forward to seeing you again in just 2 more hours. Thanks, everybody.